Hello and welcome everybody to our Topic Tuesday webinar for April. We're so excited that everyone's joining us today. We have got a fantastic speaker that is highly sought after in her knowledge around the FAFSA, and so we're so excited to have you all join us. We know that's a very hot topic that you're excited to hear about. We're excited to hear about the FAFSA simplification updates as best as we know them. So let's go ahead and get started as all of our friends join the webinar this morning. So just as a housekeeping reminder, during the presentation, we still want to engage with you, so feel free to utilize that chat box at the bottom. That will directly communicate with the panelists if you have any tech issues or any direct communication that you want to communicate with the presenters. But there's also that Q&A box at the bottom of the screen that you see. Please use that to put your questions on for the content that's being gone over. Our panelists will have a Q&A time at the end, but they have asked that if there's a timely question that pops up, to go ahead and ask in that content space. So use those two features at the bottom of your screen to engage with us this morning. And as people join us, as our friends across the state come to join and learn about FAFSA simplification, we've got a poll that we wanted to ask. In what year did Congress pass the FAFSA Simplification Act? So I'm going to launch that poll. You'll see it on your screen. You've got four options, 2019, 2020, 21, or 2022. So if you're just joining us for our webinar on FAFSA simplification, we've got a poll that we're kind of starting out with to give us some groundwork on what we're going to be covering today. All right, gonna leave that poll up for about 10 more seconds. If you haven't answered, get those answers in there on what year did Congress pass the FAFSA Simplification Act. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let us see. All right, so we have pretty even across 19, 20, and 21. The answer is actually 19. So the 8 of you that, oh, sorry, you're right. The answer is 20. So the 6 of you that said 2020, that is the correct answer. So that's when the FAFSA Simplification Act was passed by Congress. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Shannon, and she's going to get us started with today's presenter and webinar.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. I'm Shannon Grimsley, Assistant Director of External Training and Partnerships for the Woodward Hines Education Foundation and the Get to College program. We are recording today's session, and we'll send a link to anyone who is registered. For those watching the recording, today's date is April the 4th, 2023, and the material in this webinar is current through the 22-23 school year. In today's session, FAFSA Simplification, you will hear from our FAFSA expert at the National College Attainment Network about all the exciting changes that will be coming soon in regards to the FAFSA process. I will now share a little background on Get to College and a few logistics about the webinar before we get started. Get to College is a nonprofit program of the Woodward Hines Education Foundation. We have 3 centers in Mississippi, one in Jackson, Ocean Springs, and one in South Haven. And we help parents, students, and high school counselors with all aspects of the college planning and financial aid process. And all of our services are completely free. In our centers, we offer personalized college counseling appointments where we can tell students when to apply for admission and scholarship, and help fill out their FAFSA, advise on essay writing and interviewing. As we mentioned earlier, during the webinar, we cannot see or hear you, but you can ask us questions through the Q&A at any time. Kirsten Dufour will be monitoring and replying to the Q&A today. So we will have a time at the end, but as she said earlier, if there's a pertinent question, feel free to drop that in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll get to that as quickly as we can. I would now like to introduce our guest speaker for the day. Our guest speaker today is Morley Keller. Morley serves as a Senior Director of Strategic Programming for the National College Attainment Network. Ms. Keller provides professional development support to both direct service providers and managers to help ensure the effectiveness and sustainability of college access success programs. She offers consultation services with advice on governance issues, programming, data collection, financial aid, research, statewide network development, K-12 college and career programming, and best practices. Ms. Keller also manages place-based grant programs and provides member support services. Ms. Keller has a bachelor's degree in education and a master's degree in higher education administration, both from The Ohio State University. A former financial aid coordinator at OSU, Ms. Keller has extensive experience in student financial aid. In her time at the Columbus, Ohio-based NCAN member program, I Know I Can, Ms. Keller developed a program with K-12 early college awareness programming, developed a comprehensive college advising program, administered a last dollar grant program, and created a college retention program for the program participants. Ms. Keller is a member of the Ohio Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, the Ohio Association of College Admissions Counselors, and currently serves on the Ohio ACT Council. Morally, I will now turn the presentation over to you, and I know we are all anxiously awaiting to cling on to every word that you have about FAFSA changes. So thank you for being here today.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Kirsten and Shannon, for the invitation to kind of share information about what's coming. Let's go on to the next slide, please. Here is my contact information. Feel free to write down the phone number or the email address. You're welcome to reach out. You are really lucky to have Kirsten in your state, who's one of the smartest FAFSA people I know, but I'm always happy to try to answer FAFSA questions for folks. So please feel free to reach out at any time. During the presentation today, as they indicated, if you have questions on a particular slide when I'm talking, feel free to jot that down in the Q&A box. We'll also save some time at the end for questions as well. Next. First of all, let me just start with some kudos to Mississippi. The data on this chart is as of March 17th, so I know it's even higher than what it says here, but I am really confident that Mississippi will end up again probably in the top 5 states in the country for the highest FAFSA completion rates for the class of 2023. You're already 2.5 percentage points ahead of where you were last year. You finished 3rd in the country last year, so NCAN and other states look to Mississippi to figure out what's going right and how are they doing what they're doing, because there are a lot of states who would like to have the completion rate that Mississippi has. So our hats go off to Woodward Hines and the Get to College programs. Your staff absolutely rocks in your state. So next, please. Okay. We're going to talk a little bit about what caused these changes that are coming. There were literally 2 pieces of legislation that at the federal level that were passed that are bringing us to where we're at today. First was the Future Act that was passed in December 2019. And that act really allowed an expansion of being able to transfer federal income tax information from the IRS directly into the FAFSA. And then, as our poll question said, the FAFSA Simplification Act was passed in December 2020, which really led to the very specifics that you're going to learn about today that were included in that legislation. Literally, the information as passed in 2020, the new FAFSA was supposed to have been ready for 23-24, but the vast amount of changes, the department really had to go back to Congress and ask for an extension so that things could begin with the 24-25 FAFSA. Next. We're going to talk first really about the FSA ID process, because we already know that that's an important process, but it's going to become even more critical. Last July, FSA IDs have been around for a few years. Last July, though, the department added a multi-factor authentication process to the FSA ID, which you understand when you log in, then you get sent a verification code to your email or a text to your phone. et cetera, to verify that that's you logging in to the FAFSA. For next year, when the FAFSA opens for the 24-25 year, you will not be able to access the FAFSA without an FSA ID set up prior to starting the form. Everyone is going to need one. Parents, students, everyone is going to need one. So, you know, one of the things we're recommending along the way is to begin thinking about, you know, hosting sessions and things like that to help students and literally their parents get their FSA IDs set up. This, of course, says prior to October 1, we now know the department has made the announcement the FAFSA is not going to open till December. So we have a little more time, but you know, starting this spring with juniors or over the summer or once they're rising seniors in the fall, getting FSA IDs set up for students and parents will be really, really critical prior to attempting to complete a FAFSA. Next. The other thing that's going to be really critical is that information match. So when you're setting up your FSA ID, we need to make sure that people are using, you know, their legal names, social security numbers, dates of births, everything that are accurate, including their address, phone number, email address. If you are working with perhaps parents who may have set their FSA ID up a couple years ago, it may want you, or you may need to sort of check in with those parents and have them look at their FSA ID and make sure, in case they've moved, have they updated their address or something like that? Did anyone have a name change, etc. Starting for the 24-25 year, people without social security numbers are going to be able to get an FSA ID, because you heard me say everybody's going to have one to get into the FAFSA. They have indicated that this new process for people without social security numbers should be ready by August this year. They have not come out with the criteria or shown us what the process will look like yet, but everyone will be able to get an FSA ID. What that means is it's going to eliminate the signature page. There will be no more signature pages that have to be printed and hand signed and then placed in the mail, because if you have an FSA ID, you will be able to electronically sign the form. The other thing that we're hearing, and you know, it's not come out in writing yet, but we think we're going to see a little bit of a change in the FSA ID process setting it up, is that literally everyone is going to have an email address. You will also be still able to verify your FSA ID with your phone number or using an authenticator app. But we really suggest that as you're working with families to set up FSA IDs, if someone does not have an email address, that you stop and have them set up an email address before they set up their FSA ID. Lots of organizations create a cheat sheet for students or parents to write down all the information they use when they set up their FSA ID. What username did they choose? What password? What answers to challenge questions? You know, writing down the one-time backup code that they'll be provided as they establish an FSA ID. So having a cheat sheet is a really good idea for students and parents when setting up their FSA ID. Next. Just going to show you a couple things here. When you're setting up your FSA ID and you get to the end, and this is happening right now, if you put in an email address, if you put in a phone number, if you put in an authenticator app on your phone, and you can then be verified 3 different ways. We really strongly suggest that everybody attempt to be verified through all 3 ways, so that when you log into the FAFSA, you will have your choice about which way you want your FSA ID to be verified. So if you set all 3 up at the very beginning, then you'll have that choice when you log into the FAFSA. Next. You know, starting last year, you were provided with this one-time backup code when you established your FSA ID. So this is a code that we suggest that you jot down on that FSA ID cheat sheet. If for some reason none of the other verification methods work, you will be able to use the backup code to get into the FAFSA. Once you've established and used a backup code, you'll be able to log back into your FSA ID. The system will regenerate a new backup code so that you will always have one available to you. But once you've used it, you cannot use it a second time. Next. Logging into the FAFSA will, in a sense, remain the same for the student, putting in their username for their FSA ID and their password. Next. And then they will be presented with which way they would like to verify their FSA ID. So there's your choices for the app, the text, or email. Next. Once they select which way they're going to verify their FSA ID, then they will be sent a code by email, by text, or using the Authenticator app, and they would certainly enter it into the box, and that will verify their identity for the FSA ID. Next. If for some reason none of those work and you have to use that access, the one-time backup code, you will see this phrase at the bottom of the screen, help me access my account. That is the way, if you need to use a one-time backup code, that you will be able to authenticate your FSA ID. Next. You'll put your code in, your backup code. Next. It will ask you if you use a backup code to answer a couple of the challenge questions that were there. So that's why that cheat sheet will be really good to remember how you answered your questions. Next. And then you will be able to get back in get into the FAFSA. And then, like I said, once you log back in to the FSA ID, it will regenerate a new backup code for you. So you would want to update your cheat sheet with your new backup code. Next. Okay, now let's talk about what's changing with the FAFSA form and also the formula changes when a student files the FAFSA. Next. Congress's plan when they did the FAFSA Simplification Act was really targeted at 4 areas. They wanted to streamline the form. They wanted a couple different ways to determine Pell eligibility that incorporated federal poverty tables. Their intent was to change and rename the expected family contribution to the Student Aid Index. And they wanted to be able to have more filers use their IRS information when filing the FAFSA. So those were their main 4 objectives in this legislation. Next. Now, when it comes to streamlining the form and being able for more people to use the IRS tax information, when people log into the FAFSA, whether it's the student or their parent, everyone is going to be required to click a permission box or an accept box that will allow their information to be transferred from the IRS. If someone does not click the accept button or click the permission, the student will be ineligible for federal student aid. Right? The form is going to require everybody to transfer their data whenever it's possible. Okay. You will have to click the permission box, even if you are, for example, a non-tax filer. You're going to be clicking that box, that accept tab, so that the IRS can confirm that you don't have a tax return on file. If you filed a foreign tax return, again, clicking the permission box, the IRS will be able to verify that there's nothing on file at the IRS. Because this is federal tax data being transferred directly into the FAFSA, once someone clicks the box, you will never see any of the financial data anywhere related to the FAFSA. You won't see it on the screens as you progress through. You will not see it on the FAFSA summary before you hit the submit button if you're reviewing all the screens before you hit submit. And you will also not see it on the student aid report, which has a new name next year. It will be called a FAFSA submission summary. So we're going to have to get our brains trained to not say student aid report and say FAFSA submission summary. There will be a few people who will still be able to manually enter information, their income information in the form. It will primarily be people who are recently separated, and so the tax return from the prior year may still have, for example, both people's information on it, and we only need one parent's information. Those who are non-U.S. tax filers or perhaps undocumented parents will be given manual path to enter data. The number of questions has been reduced, and by checking that permission box, it will confirm people who did not file, and therefore in the future may reduce the verification burden for students, because the IRS will already have verified that there's nothing on file over there. Next. As I mentioned, the new name for the EFC is the Student Aid Index. It's probably a better name. I think the expected family contribution had a connotation for a lot of people about it being some dollar amount that the family was supposed to contribute towards college. It actually for years has been sort of used as an index, so it's been appropriately, I think, renamed. In the new calculation, the SAI can go as low as a negative 1,500. Currently, the EFC stops at 0. The SAI can go down to negative 1,500. This is to help colleges perhaps understand who the neediest campus students are on their campus. For any families that are non-tax filers, they will receive an automatic negative 1,500 SAI. The SAI, the college will use whatever that number is to package students, but they cannot go above the cost of attendance, so they can't, in a sense, use a negative SAI and award students more than the cost of attendance. Next. The 2 ways that a student will be determined to be eligible for a Pell Grant next year include one of the common ways we're very used to. The system will look at the SAI calculated, there will be a Pell Grant table, and it will perhaps tell the student the likely amount of Pell Grant that they're eligible for based on the SAI. However, incorporated in the new process will also be federal poverty tables. When students file the 24-25 FAFSA, it will be collecting income information about the year 2022. The federal poverty tables already exist for 2022. The system will be able to look at the federal poverty tables. It'll be able to look at the family size and the adjusted gross income and determine if the student might be eligible for a maximum or a minimum Pell Grant. So for a maximum Pell Grant, there'll be certain percentages of the poverty level based on the family size as well that will identify if that student is automatically eligible for a maximum Pell Grant. The same will happen on the other end of the spectrum. Perhaps a student may have an SAI that indicates that they're not Pell eligible, but their family income is within the grid established by Congress, and therefore the student might be eligible for a minimum Pell Grant. So students will sort of get 2 ways to become Pell eligible. The good news is that whatever way, whether it's the poverty table or the SAI calculation, whichever one gives them the largest Pell Grant, that's the amount that they will be eligible for. So we'll always be most generous to the student in terms of, which formula gives them the bigger Pell Grant. Next. A couple things to take into account when we think about the formula change. The new name is family size, not household size. Will be based on the number of people claimed as exemptions on the tax forms that were brought over from the IRS. Now, we know in many cases that perhaps the number of exemptions claimed on a tax form might not be an actual reflection of the family size. There will be a question there for the student to be able to modify the number that was brought over from the IRS if it's not really an accurate reflection of the family size. So we would strongly encourage, everyone to take a look at the number of exemptions on the tax return, see what that means it's going to create for a family size. And if that's not accurate, everyone should use that question. The definition of which parent's information belongs on the form was changed by Congress. It's no longer the primary custodial parent. The new definition is the parent which provided the greater portion of the student's financial support. Now, in many, many cases, that will remain the custodial parent. But there could be a case where a student resides with a particular parent, but the other parent maybe provides all the financial support for the student. And so you could be reporting the information for a parent that the student does not actually live with. The SAI formula, like the EFC formula, will no longer be divided by the number of students in college. This could have an effect on our families that have multiple siblings in college at the same time, because currently it would calculate their EFC and then divide it by the number of family members in college and appropriately award the EFC to each student. That is going to change. And so people with maybe no changes in income will see an increase in their SAI. They're also going to be required to report all assets if they have to. The family income is going up to $60,000. So families with $60,000 and above incomes will generally be the ones reporting assets. In the past, they were able to not report a business value if they had less than 100 employees, or they did not have to report the value of their farm if it was their family farm where they were residing. Those exemptions don't exist any longer. So if the family is required to report assets, they will have to report the value of any business, and they will also have to report the value of the family farm. Next. As I just mentioned, with the change in the number of college being taken out of the formula, we can see students who are going to have SAIs double or triple instantly. That could cause a reduction or a loss in Pell Grant, or in many states, maybe state need-based grants. As I mentioned, there will be some students who may be reporting income for a household that they do not reside in. Around the country, many conversations are ongoing right now. Will there be states who need to make any adjustments to their eligibility criteria for their state grants? Will colleges be making any adjustments in their packaging strategies, because they certainly don't want to lose students whose SAI is drastically different than their EFC because of the change in the formula. One thing too that we have to think about is our current college students, because of the change in the definition of which parents' information they're supposed to report. They may have filed with their custodial parent information for next year, but if they happen to be in that unique situation where there's a different parent than their custodial one who provides most of the financial support, when they file the FAFSA next year, they may be changing which parent's information goes on the form. Next. There are a lot of things that are not going to be asked on the FAFSA anymore. There used to be a question that asked about cash support and any other money paid on behalf of the students. This is the question where if you in the situation where an aunt or an uncle or grandma or grandpa had a 529 established for the student, they were supposed to enter the amount that was likely to be used. That question is gone. So if there are 529s held by other people, that is not going to be asked on the FAFSA anymore. Veterans education benefits, workman's comp. We've all known the selective service and drug question have disappeared. Payments to tax deferred pensions that are not on the federal tax return will no longer be asked. The other untaxed income question sources are all gone. Child support paid out of the household, that question is also gone. Please note that the question about child support received is still on the form. So, but it has been moved to the asset section. The rationale behind that is because there is no other income section on the form, because it's all going to be transferred from the IRS. There's kind of really no place to place the child support question. So they moved it over to the asset section. What that means is only families who have to report assets have to report child support. For families that are not required to report assets, they're not going to have to report any information about the child support that they received. Next. There will be demographic survey questions on the FAFSA. This year, we saw some of those demographic survey questions. It was inserted at the end of the FAFSA sort of as a mandatory survey that had to be completed before the student was allowed to hit submit. Now the questions have been moved literally, what I would say, inside the student section on the form. The questions will be presented. The student is still given the option. If they prefer not to answer the question, they simply will be checking that box and they don't have to provide any information, but just know that the questions are sort of, as we would refer, inside the form instead of the supplemental survey at the end like it is this year. Students, when they do the online form, will be able now to list up to 20 colleges on the form instead of 10. So we hope that will handle the bulk of the students in the country. We'll be able to get all of their colleges on the first time they file and not have to log back in and take a couple off and add a couple more. When parents and spouses are providing information on the form, they're going to have to enter the full set of demographic information about themselves, including full mailing addresses, email, and phone numbers. Currently on the form, it asks for like the parent's first initial and last name and date of birth. So there's limited demographic information that it collects, but starting next year, they'll have to enter the full set of information. Excuse me. Because everybody has to log in, the save key is gone. No more starting a FAFSA and saving it and writing down the save key and giving that to someone who is going to log back in, because they'll log in with their FSA ID. That's all they'll need to get into the form. Next. All right, let's talk a little bit about how the processes are going to change. As I just mentioned, the department has announced that the FAFSA is not going to open until December. They haven't given us the specific day in December. We just know it's not until December. When they are presented the question to grant permission from the IRS, they're going to have to do that. If they will not give permission, they will be presented with some manual questions. The department will process the FAFSA. They will send it to the colleges that were listed, but it's going to come with a flag that indicates that permission was not granted and SAI was not calculated. And the college is going to have to reach back out to the student and or parent to get them to sign the permission box before they'll be able to determine their federal eligibility. When a student, for example, starts the form, they'll do their dependency questions, and when it's determined that they're dependent, it's going to ask who else's information needs to be on the form. There'll be a little set of questions that pop up if the student happens to be in the position of having a divorced or separated parent, to figure out exactly which parent's information will be on the form. Once the student fills in the information of which parent or parent's information needs to be on the form, they're going to have to know accurate information about their parents. They're going to have to know their parents' first and last legal name. They're going to have to know their date of birth. They're going to have to know their social security number, and they're going to have to know their email address. So it's going to be really critical if you're working with a student who's going to start this process and do their section. They're going to need to know this information about their parent, and it needs to be the information as the way it appears in the parent's FSA ID, so that there can be a match, right? And I would just say a lot of students maybe don't exactly remember people's birthdays, or don't necessarily know the formal legal name of their parents, but they are going to have to do that to have it be accurate in the FAFSA. In the past, people were referred to on the form as parent 1 and parent 2. Now it will be parent and other parent in the form next year. So a little change in references there. Next. If the student is the first person into the form, they are going to be presented the asset questions and are going to need to answer them, because the form does not know yet whether the family is under the $60,000 income ceiling. Once the parent completes their portion of the form, if the parents were not required to report assets, any answers that the student provided for assets will not be used in the formulation and calculation of the student aid index, right? If we have a situation where a parent files and the indication comes over that there was no tax return found over at the IRS for the first few months, probably like December, January, etc., federal student aid will continue to send the file over to the IRS just to make sure that somebody was not a really, really late tax filer. So that will happen always for the first couple months that the cycle opens, and then that process will stop. We have to think about, when we talk about everybody needs an FSA ID, particularly our parents who do married filing separately, or our parents who are unmarried but living together, or our undocumented parents. Everybody's going to have an FSA ID, because they're each going to have to log in, and they're each going to have to grant permission for the IRS to bring over information, even if there's no information to bring, but they're all going to have to log in separately. So when we use the phrase, everybody needs an FSA ID, that's the mantra to operate under. The formula will also have to ask if the parent is married. are they married to the person who was on their 2022 tax return? There could be a possibility that there was a divorce and a remarriage by the time they're filing the form, since they used prior year. So you probably will see a question pop up, making sure that if the parent answers as married, that they're married to the person who was on their 2022 tax return. Next. In terms of family size, I indicated they're going to calculate that by bringing over the number of exemptions. The department will write a couple business rules. In other words, let's say we have an individual parent who is maybe currently divorced, not remarried, and there's a student in the household. But by the divorce decree, the other parent is allowed to claim the student. So when it would bring the tax exemptions over from the IRS, it would perhaps only bring one as the parent. The department will automatically bump the household size to 2 because there at least has to be a parent and a student in a dependent student's case. If it's married parents and one student and some number less than 3 comes over, it will bring the family size up to 3. I mentioned there was that question to modify the family size. NCAN is going to continue to gather information and see if we don't maybe make the recommendation that everybody answer the updated family size question, just to make sure that an accurate number is always used in the calculation. I mentioned that you're not going to be able to see any of that information transferred from the IRS. So in some respects, it will be even more difficult to counsel students when they have their FAFSA submission summary in their hand, because you're not going to be able to see any of the tax information at all. The SAI will be on there, but you are not going to have any indication of how that was calculated or what numbers were used. We're used to calling that the DRT tool. Did the student use the IRS DRT? That's technically not a phrase anymore. That process is going away. This will be a direct transfer from the IRS into the FAFSA. No more trying to type in the exact address that was on the tax return to make it match so the information can come over. It'll be a direct transfer, so that should be a smoother process for many, many families. Next. If you think about your students who are in college, since we're using different questions and a different formula, when students next year do the renewal FAFSA, they will have to answer many, many more questions than they typically would right now. And that's due to all the changes in the formula in which parents' information has to be provided. So next year, our students who are doing a renewal form will probably feel like it takes them a little longer. And that's because the answer is it will take them a little longer. When the student enters that information about their parent and who else needs to contribute to the form, it does have to be exact. If it does not match what's in the parent's FSA ID, that parent will not be able to be logged in and matched up with the student whose form needs them to put their information on. If the student, in a sense, put a wrong birth date and so it can't be matched up, the student is literally going to have to log back into the form, change the answer to the question about their parent's birthday, and then the parent, once it matches the FSA ID, will be allowed to log in. We have to think about how this changes other things for any of the colleges that use the CSS profile. How will their questions differ at all next year? They have indicated they will open the profile on October 1, so it will be available, and they will continue to use number in college when they calculate the institutional methodology. So there will be a situation where somebody's institutional methodology calculated by the CSS profile could be dramatically different than the federal SAI calculated when number in college is no longer considered. Next. Okay, more implications. We want to think of school counselors as a great resource to students, and you provide them a lot of information. It's very likely that any of your resource materials related to the FSA ID or the FSA process that you may have in your office, it will be probably time to throw them all out. At the end of the academic year. Not a lot of information is going to carry over, right? Do you have information up on even your school website about the FAFSA process and when it opens? Does your website say, opens October 1st? Because that's certainly not going to be the case this year. Yet want you to think about those efforts that we mentioned. How will you help every student and all their parents, even those that don't have social security numbers, get their FSA IDs before they get ready to start the form? You'll have to think about how flexible you can be in delivering assistance in completing the FAFSA, because now the form is not going to open till December. So you won't be holding FAFSA or financial aid information nights necessarily, or FAFSA completion nights in October or November, or maybe even in December, depending on the date that it opens. You may not be able to provide any of that assistance until January. So how does that change what you do, what you concentrate on with students? You also have to think about, if you do offer FAFSA completion workshops, having that multi-factor authentication process. You know, you have to kind of really think about how critical it will be to have the student and the parent, if the student is dependent, there at the same time, so that when the parent logs in, they can get their code, and when the student logs in, they can get their code and be able to log into their sections and complete the form. So it may mean we encourage more students and parents to arrive at the workshops together, instead of the parent always trying to do it for the student or the student doing it for their parents. So next. If you have conversation with current college students, you know, messaging to them, they're really the ones that are going to feel the changes in the form. If we really think about it, your high school seniors next year, this will be their FAFSA process. They're not going to understand a different process unless the parent maybe had an older child who filed a FAFSA. But for your seniors, next year's FAFSA will be their FAFSA. They're not going to really feel changes. It will be the students who are currently in college who will feel a dramatic difference in the form. You know, because families are going to have to report those assets that they maybe did not have to do in the past. How can we counsel families, reaching out to colleges to figure out if they're going to really be willing to make any kind of adjustments, or how will state agencies adjust? You know, we'll kind of all have to learn if the state's going to change any deadline dates or criteria for eligibility. We're all going to have to understand those so that we can advise the students. And if you do have students applying to institutions that need to do the profile, could be very likely that they're doing the profile this fall well ahead of when the actual FAFSA opens. What we don't want to see happen is colleges who feel like it's not enough information on the FAFSA anymore, so that they add the profile as an additional requirement. That would be a really unintended consequence, and we honestly do not want to see that happen with the changes to the new process. Next. You know, thinking about this, federal student aid has to revamp every resource really that they've ever created. Many of us may go to their financial aid toolkit site or their Better FAFSA information page. It will take them the series and the time frame of this whole year to revamp their resources and get them you know, available for counselors and college access organizations and things like that to use. You know, kind of what's going to be the ripple effect for your state agencies, your colleges, your organizations with the later time frame. You know, we have states in the country who have FAFSA as a graduation requirement for their students. Those states now have what may be 2.5 to almost 3 months less time for all their seniors to get the FAFSA filed as a graduation requirement. We're going to have to train everybody. It's a new process for anybody who assists people with completing the FAFSA. We got to get all the counselors trained, all the college access folks. So hopefully if there's training offered in your state, and I'm sure Woodward Hines will do a great job, you want to take full advantage of all that training so you understand the system. We will keep our fingers crossed that there are no flaws in the system when it opens in December. But when you have a brand new system, there is potential. So we'll have to wait and see you know, what happens. We are hoping, though, that with all this additional information coming over from the IRS, the department has indicated that they will go back to random selection for verification. And so we hope the percentages remain small and that a lot of people are not going to have to provide any version of tax documents, since most of their information came over from the IRS. So we hope that makes verification a less painful process for students and families. Next. My organization has advocated for a simplified FAFSA for years and years and years. We're working with federal student aid right now to help create a smooth implementation of the new system. We're committed to providing training and resources and tools. We will shove everything we have out to all of our members. And so the folks at Woodward Hines will have every kind of resource and tool we create at their fingertips to use. And so we are hoping our motto is that we'll be better together to deliver a better FAFSA, better future, which is their new motto. So, everybody needs to hang in there together as we get through these changes. All right, next, I think we're ready to head to questions.
All right, Marley, so there's one question in the chat that I think I answered, but says they have some students who have no contact with or information about one of their parents. How will educators advise those in this process?
It will depend on the marital status of the parent that provides most financial support. So let's assume that's the custodial parent. And if that person's marital status is separated or divorced, they don't necessarily need any information about the other parent. However, if the marital status is married, they are going to be asked to provide the information for both parents, because you don't know which one's actually going to be the one that logs in and finishes the form, right? So they're going to be asked for both parents' information. So, okay, so this is being recorded, so I'm going to say this, but to get past that screen on the new FAFSA, they may have to make a little something up for a minute. They may have to make up an email address if they don't exactly know it or something like that to get past it, and then go back in and correct it once they know it, if that person actually has to contribute information on the form. But you didn't hear me say that, but it will be critical to have that full set of demographic information about both parents if the parent marital status is married or remarried when they're doing the form.
So another question that I was asked earlier, right now when we assess students and families completing their FAFSA and we're manually doing the IRS data retrieval and linking those taxes, sometimes there is a differential between the actual name of the individual and what's on the tax return, or there's, transposed numbers or letters and things like that. With the new process of the direct data exchange, how will that work when we're kind of removed from that double checking piece of the tax info?
They haven't put it all out in writing, but to the best of our knowledge, they're pretty much going to match people with their social security numbers. So if your social security number in your FSA ID is accurate and it matches on your tax return, you're not going to have to worry about different spelled names or things like that. If the SSNs match, we probably should be able to see their data retrieved. If there is an error, and I'm guessing the error would need to be on the tax return, right? Because you had your social security number verified when you set up your FSA ID. So we have to assume that's your accurate one. If for some reason the wrong tax return or the tax return has the wrong social security number on it and therefore can't be matched, that's going to have to be one of those processes that we assume federal student aid is going to put guidance out on, whether they're going to have to, God forbid, indicate that you have to go back and update your tax return with the correct social security number, or something like that for it to be able to be matched. We're going to need some guidance out of the department on how that happens, because people certainly do transpose numbers and things like that. And in some cases, the IRS will catch it, right? Because they do a social security number match as well. So, the department may tell us that because the IRS matches with the Social Security Administration when they're processing your taxes, that maybe internally in their system, they update the social security number to the correct one versus what you see on the form. I don't know that that's the case, but we hope to get some guidance out of the department about how that will get fixed so that the information can be transferred over to the FAFSA.
All right, so we have one last question that's come through. if a parent is newly married to a non-parent, but this new step parent is not financially contributing to the education, does the student have to include the step parent's income?
The answer to that question is yes. If that student's actual parent is the one who provides the greatest financial support, so therefore is the one that's supposed to be reported on the FAFSA, if that person is married, every parent in that household will need to provide their information. Whether that step parent intends to contribute anything towards the education is not really sort of relevant according to federal regulations. If there are two parents in that household and those parents are married, both parents' income tax information is going to need to be placed into the FAFSA to determine the student's eligibility.
All right, so that's all the questions that we have. So Shannon, I'm gonna hand it back over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Morley. That was great information. A lot to take in, I know, but as Morley said, don't worry, Get to College will be there to help train you. We'll get through this together, and we are excited about the new possibilities for sure for the simplified FAFSA. So we will email everyone the recording for this webinar in the next couple of days and post it on our YouTube channel. We would appreciate it if you would complete the short survey that will automatically pop up at the end of this meeting. Please fill that out and give us feedback on today's webinar so that we can keep improving. Stay tuned for our last Topic Tuesday. I can't believe the academic year is almost over. That last Topic Tuesday webinar will be Tuesday, May the 2nd. And during this webinar, we'll be discussing the new FACE scholarship for Mississippi foster youth. So tune in for that one. I know a lot of you have had some questions about how that works, and we'll have some experts in the room to talk about that and this new opportunity in Mississippi. If you have participated in 5 webinars throughout this series, you will have the opportunity to apply for 0.5 CEUs. And if by the end of May, you've participated in all 10 of the webinars over the fall and spring semesters, you'll have the opportunity to apply for 1 full CEU. And I'll give you all that information on our next May Topic Tuesday, but I do send that out to everyone so that they can apply for their CEUs along with the form from Mississippi College to get that completed. You can register for this last Topic Tuesday webinar on our Get to College website. It's listed under the educator header and then select Topic Tuesday events. While you're there registering, please check out all the other resources for you and your students listed under that educator tab. And of course, if you have any follow-up questions, you can reach out to us by our email or any of our social media options that you see here on the screen. So thank you again for being with us today, and we look forward to that last Topic Tuesday in May. And thank you, Morley, and we'll see you all in May.